There we go.
That sounded like it.
We'll start.
All right. Do we have any members of the public? Do we know?
We have one.
Okay.
Oh, that's so that's Mr. Van Royen and Rebecca Meadows.
Okay.
Represent both here.
Okay. Got it. Well, welcome. Call to order. Are there any other matters that are not listed on the agenda? Okay, we will move on to the approval of the November 14th meeting. Assuming everybody had a chance to read them. I was not here for that meeting. Do I have a motion to approve? All right, thank you, Dr. Moses.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? November 14, 2024 minutes approved. All right, moving on to item
Thank you.
4. Scott or James, take it away, guys.
James, are you able to get those slides to go, or you still need me to send those over? Oh, there they are. Hang on just a sec.
Sorry, everyone. I think I've got my microphone working. My speakers work for 5 seconds at a time.
Okay.
So I'm trying to get this fixed. At the very least, assuming that my microphone is still working and is continuing to work, I can give the presentation. I can't accept questions. At least short term, we can do that. And I know Rebecca Meadows, the landowner's attorney, is here with us. She can answer questions. Scott will be able to answer questions. And I'll keep trying to get my system fixed.
James, if you want
In the meantime,
stop share, I can share.
I will. Sorry, Scott. I know you were saying something there, but I can't hear what it is.
Okay.
All right, let's go on. Let's just go ahead and present and
Just keep going, Jay. Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Okay. Apologies for this. So we have for you a donation proposal that you saw first in October. It came before the body in October and was approved. It's come back. The landowner has asked to bring it back with one small change. I'll go through it all again, and I'll highlight that point where that change is. Otherwise, it's the same details that we saw in October. So the property consists of 4 parcels, just under 200 acres along Route 29 southwest of Charlottesville. There's currently 1 dwelling on the property, and the proposal would eliminate approximately 10 potential dwellings. The natural resources on the property include about 110 acres of critical slopes, 120 acres within the mountain protection area. It contains 85 acres listed as important for agriculture and 150 acres listed important for forestry, as designated in the county's comprehensive plan. It has about 2,500 feet of frontage on Route 29, which is a designated entrance corridor, and also shares approximately 4,600 feet of boundary with an existing conservation easement. The property is not in a historic district, but it is directly across the road from Arrowhead Farm, which is on the National Register of Historic Places. So the terms proposed, the property is currently 4 parcels under single ownership. The proposal would permit division into 2 separate ownerships, no
Can
more
you
than
tell
2
us,
separate
James,
ownerships.
what's the acreage of the property?
This is the part that is different. This is the change. The proposal
Sure.
that was approved in October had a minimum ownership size of 80 acres. And that's now been removed. So there's no minimum for the separate ownerships.
Sherry, it's 192 acres. And
Okay,
change.
thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Keep going. Thank you. Each of those separate ownerships would be permitted up to 6,500 square feet of above ground living area to be spread between up to 2 dwellings per ownership. So that would give a maximum of 4 dwellings across the entire property. And there is one existing dwelling. It's there in the middle of the property in that donut hole, and that would count towards the limit. Other terms include no structures above the 800-foot contour line. That's highlighted in gray on the map here, and no structures within 400 feet of Route 29. And that's no structures at all. It's not the typical thing you would see where it's structures under 500 square feet would be an exception. In this case, it's no structures within 400 feet. The landowner and ourselves, we thought that made more sense given the topography of the property and the length of the property along the entrance corridor. There would also be no clearing for agriculture above the 800-foot contour line. And there would be a 35-foot riparian buffer on the streams and the pond highlighted there in pink. The landowner has proposed 3 potential building envelopes. You see the 2 highlighted there in red and the 1 existing building envelope highlighted in yellow. That's kind of the donut hole parcel. And staff still finds that the donation proposal meets the acceptance criteria, but we are interested to hear your thoughts on the change, given that now there's no minimum on the 2 separate ownerships, that division restriction. I believe Mr. Van Rooyen is here, and he could explain why he's asked for that, if you would like to hear from him. So given that, I'll leave it up for you to do discussion. Again, I can't hear anything that's going on. Hopefully Scott can do the controls, and I'll keep working to try to fix the issue. Thank you.
Can you go back to the slide that had the map?
Scott, can you pull that up?
Yeah, thanks. So I remember this a little bit from October. So it's still the 4 parcels. And it can still be divided into 2 separate ownerships, but there's no minimum acreage. Is that the change?
That's the only change.
Okay. So I would be curious, given the lay of the land that's there now, and where would you anticipate the division being where you did make it 2 parcels?
Let's see if we can make sure that Mr. Van Rooyen can speak here. James, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you want to either.
You move him up to panelist.
Yeah. Sorry for the audio difficulties. We'll try to get this straight as quick as we can here.
Send him a chat.
Yeah, that's what I'm working on.
And I actually think that these easements are better off in most cases without that minimum acreage limitation. Because I know at VOF anyway, it's come to grief a number of times. I mean, they may want to divide 5 acres, or they might want to divide it down the middle, and there's probably no way to know at this stage of the game.
And how many times can they do that? I mean, I know it can only be 2 parcels, but over time, could they change? Could the configuration of the parcels change more than once?
I think so.
And
Yeah.
I don't know that that matters. It just occurred to me, and I'm curious.
Yeah, it just seems like an internal boundary line adjustment wouldn't really affect the overall, you know, the net of the conservation value anyway.
Shay, that's what I agree with you that it would just be an internal boundary line adjustment and all the parcels would still be under the same terms and conditions.
Hello, Richie.
Hi, Sherry. Sherry, but I'm also reminded in October, you mentioned mailboxes and fence posts in that no build zone. And I don't know if we adopted that, if that should be adopted.
Oh, yeah, please say, don't include structures when you say no buildings in a certain place.
Well, can't you just make an exception for things like mailboxes?
It is so much easier to just say no structures, or no structures larger than 200 feet or something like that, because, you know, do you really want to prohibit a bluebird box, or, you know, whatever the next thing is?
Could be a school bus stand for the kids or something.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the more generic, if we can just deal with, you know, size and, you know, location, I think we're largely better off. One thing I would, since there seems to be a little lull in the action here, Richie will probably be delighted to hear me bring this up. But the discussion about 2 separate ownerships, et cetera, and there still being 4 parcels, makes me think that we may want there to be only 2 parcels. And if it is possible to vacate the parcels that do not look viable, which is to say 2 of 4, I think we have a much safer easement going forward.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted this, that there would be just potential for 2 parcels. And then they could divide that. Basically, the existing internal parcel lines would theoretically disappear, and they could draw the other, you know, they make that division as seen, you know, as suited at the time.
Yeah, the problem with parcels of record that remain is that someday somebody's going to sue the county or the authority to be able to break those parcels off.
I guess my thought process would be that when they go to create the 2 parcels in terms of a boundary line adjustment, that they would abandon or vacate those existing parcels or internal boundary lines.
So
That would be years from now, right?
could be. So Sherry, are you suggesting, for example, that we get rid of the parcel 29 and 40 because they kind of are the
Yes, exactly.
fringe ones? Yeah.
Exactly.
I agree with that.
Yeah, that's obvious, but then is the parcel, what is it, 2681 or whatever, hard time reading it there. If that one and the 2682 are the 2 left, are they talking about subdividing that internally? Like 2682 could become 2 parcels?
But they'd have to get rid of 81. They could only have 2 parcels of record.
Right, right, so they'd be getting rid of
2
3.
parcels total, or 2 ownerships, or 2 chunks of ground total, Dave.
Okay, all right, yeah.
I mean, it looks like an uneven and weird configuration to leave just the house parcel and then everything else. There may be reasons for doing it. I remember doing one with Lucius Bracey once where it was a Cupert trust, and you had to have a small parcel like that with the house. And it could be that kind of situation, either now or later on. But otherwise, it's just a question, I guess, of dealing with the county and doing a parcel of record, boundary line change. I mean, it's a pain, and somebody's going to make somebody survey something probably, but unless people know what they want now, best to leave well enough alone, I suppose.
Right. It seems like as existing, it serves their current purposes, but to make things clean and more efficient in the future, being able to make two, more sensible or equal parcels, or the more suitable parcels later, seems reasonable.
I think we've got it set so Mr. Van Rooyen and Ms. Meadows can speak now if they'd like to.
Okay, please. Do you guys have anything to say or add?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Scott. I guess my question is what you envision the time frame to be like. We haven't really talked in the last day or so, but I think the plan had been to try and get Mr. Van Rooyen's easement done this year. And if we're trying to vacate parcels before then, I don't know, that doesn't seem possible to me. So I was wondering if you're
Yeah, it
thinking
won't
about the
happen.
requirement before.
I don't think we've ever required that with prior donations.
Yeah,
And I think it's just a question of practicality that if they go to subdivide it into two parcels, then practically speaking, the other internal boundaries in other parcels would all be merged into one or two. But I don't think we can make that a condition.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, given the
of this
time frame, it's
donation.
totally hopeless.
Yeah.
I wish we'd known about all this like 6 months ago. Maybe that would have been a chance. I wondered the same thing that Ms. Meadows is saying. When you showed those building envelope areas, are you all going to try to get building envelopes done by the year's end? Is somebody going to go GPS those things?
I think so. We don't have the capability to do that. I know he doesn't want them surveyed, but I think GIS coordinates, we would try to, yes.
Okay, I just wondered what the staff who's on the line here is thinking in terms of the practicality of that.
I mean, we'll do everything we can to help that along, but in the past, whenever there have been issues of building envelopes that needed to be tied down by either a survey or GPS, we have not been the ones to do those. Those have always been provided by someone working for the landowner.
Lord,
to
really?
be honest, don't know whether or not we may have access to some equipment, but I don't know off the top of my head if we do or not.
I mean,
James
roughly
and I
all
can try to
they
find out, but
roughly all they would need is sort of a center point and then a better than rough estimate of how many acres around that point they're talking about as far as an envelope is concerned. That'd
I
be
think
the
in the
quick,
past
that'd be the quick and dirty way to do it.
yeah,
Yeah, it's just
a
quick to
little dirty.
remember the quick and dirty and perpetual or kind of, sometimes they're not really
a little bit
compatible
Yeah.
ideas. I mean, once you lock in the building envelopes, it just worries me that you do it quick to get a tax break and then where somebody wants to build doesn't work. So I'm just expressing that as a time worry.
We can work with Ms. Meadows, presuming that you all approve this, starting tomorrow, see what the options are to get that done. I would like to, at the very least, get 4 corners on each of the
Yeah, I would
envelopes.
think. And it needs to be looked at, you need to look at it on the topo and then go back and look at it again on the aerial. And if possible, somebody and David go out and have a walkabout.
Yeah.
Maybe the PEC would help you. Most people who do easements can GPS their corners of building envelopes. And I know the PEC can do it. So they might step up and do it for you if you can find anybody that's around this time of year.
Well, obviously we'll do whatever we can to help. If we can find somebody at the county that can do it or that can train us to do it.
Yeah, sure. If somebody in the county.
It's just,
I think
But
it's important next
I
year.
can't volunteer because I don't know, but we can try to.
Yeah, of course.
figure it out.
I think it's
Let me
important
assure
next year
Sha-
that we learn to do it and we have that capability, you know, on the staff in-house.
Yeah, we can work on that.
Let me assure Sherry that the PEC works until midnight on New Year's Eve.
Well, I hope they do. I hope they do.
Courthouse doesn't.
Ah, that's funny.
So generally speaking, we're in agreement with this. We just need to hammer these details out, correct? In terms of the procedure with the parcels.
Suits me.
Would it be reasonable or efficient for you guys to get, like, we determine a grocery list, so to speak, of what we'd like to see happen, and if we can facilitate it having signed by the end of the year, you guys give me authority to sign it. If we can button these things down, so then we don't have to meet again as well.
It sounded from the prior discussion like maybe the parcel issue was not going to be dealt with, especially due to the time constraints, and that could be addressed in the future through boundary line adjustment. So other than that, I think the remaining issue was whether or not you all wanted to include in a motion some variance from the no structures in the front 400 feet, and to make that, you know, no structures above 200 square feet or something like that, to allow for bus shelters and bird boxes and all of that.
The suggestion in, this was Sherry's suggestion in October, was no structures within 400 feet of Route 29 other than minor, I guess it would be minor structures. And we might say no buildings, but other than minor structures such as mailboxes, fence posts, that sort of thing.
We can certainly do that. We've done very similar language for riparian buffers before, where we've said no structures except for I don't remember the exact language, but we can work that out if you all are.
Yeah,
find it
usually a
acceptable.
size limitation is better than a word that people can't pin down, like minor or minimal or significant or whatever.
Well, do we want to say
I would
50
take
square
structures
feet?
out altogether, and I would just deal with buildings. I don't think we should be dealing with structures unless you worry about structures that might be over, some big size.
Right. Are going to people parse language and say, what's the difference between a building and a structure?
Yep.
You know, the thing that I like about the number is that it's qualitative and not, it's quantitative and not qualitative.
Well, what about a billboard sign?
Oh, that's
Well,
a
we
county
already have a
ordinance.
limitation on signage, I believe.
Yeah, it's in the template.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and de minimis is too vague.
I mean, we can say with the exception of, I don't know, structures of, I would say 50 square feet.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, sure. And you might also say in linear structures like, fences or stuff like that.
Could I introduce another question?
Go for it.
I didn't hear the original presentation in October, but there seems to be an ambiguity here between the number of parcels, the ownership, and the number of dwellings. Are we talking after the internal boundary line adjustments to say that there will be 2 remaining parcels or 3 remaining parcels?
2 total parcels.
Well, it says divisions though in the presentation, so that would lead you to think that it's the divisions of the 3. If it is not ambiguous to you, then I'm just not thinking clearly this afternoon, but we would end up with 4 dwellings, including the existing.
Yes.
With 2 separate ownerships.
Correct. Does that define 2 dwellings per parcel, or could it be 3 in 1?
Well, that's the question.
That was a question I had as well. We have 3 building envelopes, or 3. We have the existing building curtilage hole in the donut. That's essentially a building envelope, and then 2 more. Is that correct?
So if you look in the dwelling section of the table that's up there on screen right now, you'll see it says up to 2 dwellings per ownership. So each one could have 2. It wouldn't be 3 in 1.
And it's actually
Oh.
nice because then you don't have 3 on 1.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was my concern, was that you ended up with the building envelopes not necessarily lining up with the parcels, and the number of dwellings per parcel in ownership was maybe vague, but perhaps it's not, given the language that we're looking at.
It also seems with the topography that, you know, I picture like a main dwelling and an accessory dwelling on each. That's what the second dwelling would be. And so, you know, with a little bit of, I look at that donut hole and it just gives me the sense of some living space density, so to speak, or improvement density.
Yeah, there's going to be a certain degree that if the dwellings have to be in the building envelopes, which they would.
Correct.
And how many dwellings are in the hole in the donut right now?
1.
Just one. Okay.
You would like a motion, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
So made.
So James presented a few options. Scott, can we go to that slide?
Right, I move that we approve this proposal, subject to identifying the building envelopes.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll
So,
second.
quick, does
Did
that
you
include
want
the
to-
amendment as to the linear structures and structures up to 50 square
Oh,
feet
right,
in the
yeah.
no build zone? As a friendly
Yeah.
amendment?
I would add that the amendments that we've talked about so far as to structures within the 400 feet, yes.
All right. And Dr. Moses, are you still good with seconding that?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Van Roy, Ms. Meadows, does this sound agreeable to you all?
I don't know if you can hear me.
What was the
Yes.
final square footage number that you agreed on? Was it 50 or you talked about 200 at one point?
Most recent I heard was 50.
Oh,
50.
for the structures in the setback zone. 50 square feet or linear structures such as fences, mailboxes. I guess benches, I don't know, or bus stop shelters.
Right. Okay. Is there further discussion on this?
I'd like to hear the motion read in full.
All right.
My understanding is the motion was to accept the proposed easement donation subject to recordation of the building envelopes with the amendment to the proposal that structures up to 50 square feet or linear structures be permitted in the 400-foot setback.
And to be clear, I wasn't meaning that we needed to survey those envelopes. I just think we need to nail
Just the-
down with a
Just need to
GPS.
identify them. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, when you talked about recording them, I don't mean with a survey or anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. How does that sound?
I don't know, Lee Rasmussen. who's
Hello,
joined the
Lee.
meeting.
Well, there's
I don't know
more
if he has
to
any
it.
comments.
There's more to it than that. I mean, what about the clause that Jay, you will sign it?
I don't think that where are we on that? I mean, it sounds like we are pretty well on our way aside from the building envelopes, correct?
I think in the past we have taken a motion to accept as a motion to permit the chair to sign the deed if it meets these terms, but if you
Yeah,
all
I
would like
thought
to
it was
revise the
implicit.
motion.
I thought that was implicit in the
Okay,
the
that's-
acceptance that the chairman could sign to accept.
That's, yep.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? All right. All in favor of accepting this proposal as proposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right.
Can I just say one thing since Lee is now on here?
Correct.
I just wanted to raise the caveat that if people get frustrated with the building envelopes and say, oh, the heck with them, let's skip them so we can get this done, that Lee will explain that possible tax consequences of doing that.
Yes.
Can't bill us
I
for
will.
it, though, Lee. All right. Moving on. I'm not looking at the agenda. Is there any new business? That's good to hear. I would like to bring up some old business and revisit Native Pond. I imagine that's why Lee has signed on also. This came up in front of us in October, I believe. And we had decided can we pull that up, Scott?
Give me just a minute. Hang on.
We can. Sorry, my audio is working now. I can hear you all fine. Thank you for your patience. Since you told me that you wanted to bring this up, I have them attached to this. So
Okay, go ahead.
we can go right there. Would you like just to kind of go over the presentation again, or how you
Well,
want to do it too?
not yet. But I'm kind of asking the board in general if there wasn't clarity on number of dwellings on it, and if there's even a willingness of the authority to take another look at this. Also,
Can we see a map? I mean, this may not be etched in our memories.
correct?
Clearly is not. Yeah.
Oh, that's what I thought it was.
Did-
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, James, can you give us a brief run through, please?
Yeah, I'll give a very brief run through so to kind of jog your memory, and then if you want to go deeper into it, I can give all the details. This is an existing easement in the Ivy area of the county. The existing easement is highlighted in green. And the amendment proposal was to add those two parcels in pink. And there was discussion about the potential values of adding the eastern pink parcel, the remainder of 37C3, and the authority approved the amendment proposal, but only to add 37A, the parcel in the west, not to add the parcel in the east, 37C3. And I can go over it in more detail if you all want to hear more and kind of reconsider it.
Wasn't there some reason having to do with not just the appearance of the county assessor, which I think we can all agree might have been unfortunate, but any division rights, any dwelling rights? I mean, is it built out, in other words? And we had
Yes.
some reasons for wanting to leave it out, and they
Yeah,
weren't the county assessor's reasons.
That was the issue. The parcel to the east is fully developed and is not giving up any development potential in joining.
Sorry to interrupt, but except for that the report mistakenly said that there were two dwellings on the eastern property.
Right,
When in
yeah.
fact, there was only one.
That's a good point. I should cover that now in your consideration of whether to go into this. The existing easement permits one dwelling that has not been built yet. The amendment proposal, as brought to you in October, said that that eastern parcel of 37C3 contains two dwellings, a main dwelling about 6,000 square foot and a guest house. And so the amendment proposal would add permission for those two dwellings so that in all, there would be three dwellings permitted. After that meeting, I realized I made a mistake there, and that according to county zoning, that guest house is not listed as a dwelling. I think because it has 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, but no cooking facilities. So the amendment proposal now would be to add that existing dwelling and permission for the guest house. Of course, the authority doesn't have to go by zoning's rules, but if it did, then that would be 2 dwellings plus a guest house, which on an easement of about 100 acres would be the difference between meeting or exceeding the authority's density guidelines.
What have you marked right by the legend 5937C3? What is the weight there?
There's a pond in there.
Yeah, that's a pond.
If I remember correctly from October, one thing that was brought up was what we see as green and pink as C3 was originally 2 parcels, and they made it into 1 parcel. And they said now it's confusing because part of that is in conservation easement and part is not. But they created that because they made it 1 parcel.
I don't think the fact that it was confusing was part of the rationale for doing this, but that was explicitly permitted in the original deed for that combination to happen.
Scott, we're now being asked to reconsider including 37C3
Yes.
with the rationale that there actually is 1 dwelling that would be eliminated by accepting it.
I'm not sure there would
no.
be at
No,
this
that-
point.
It's still fully developed, but
It's just that one of the dwellings isn't
Right.
a dwelling yet. There's already a guest house and a main house, but the guest house was erroneously thought to be a main house. I mean, a dwelling,
full
which
dwelling,
is a
yeah.
perfectly understandable, confusion. But another house can yet be built on that C3. How big is C3?
The pink portion is 21 acres. The green portion, I believe, is about 12 to 15 acres.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it? I feel like they were proposing to build the second dwelling on C1, kind of near
Yeah, the
59.
the currently permitted dwelling would go on C1, quite close to where it's labeled 37C1.
Mm-hmm.
We're not asking for a second dwelling on C3. It would, the dwelling that exists would remain the permitted dwelling under the current easement, would eventually be built maybe on C1, C or C1. And then 37A would be added with no dwellings, no buildings at all.
Okay, and so it would be a 100-acre easement with 2 dwellings on it.
Correct.
At the end.
What about
Okay.
those other orange squares? Are none of them are dwellings? There's some on to the south and
Yeah,
the green part of C3. What's going on there?
Dance studio and a temple.
yeah, the
and-
large one is a dance studio. There's a temple, there's an equipment shed.
Is there an overall cap on roofs or impervious or anything like that on this easement? I'm sorry, I just don't remember.
Or finished square footage. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to go back and look. I don't remember.
In the past, we've had a fairly low threshold for accepting easements that are contiguous to existing easements. We have accepted easements where there is no potential elimination of building rights with the rationale that with a change in zoning, there could be future development on a parcel that's not protected by an easement. So there would be a compelling rationale for 37C3 to be included by our past actions.
Yeah, I mean, I taking away, I agree with you. And I think taking away all the lines and colors and looking at the 100 acres with just 2 dwellings on it and the outbuildings, it has significant conservation value with Ivy Creek running through the middle of it too.
Jay,
So
do you mind, it sounds like you're considering this. Do you mind if I just go back and make sure you have all the information on what exactly is proposed in the amendment?
Correct. That would be great then. Thanks.
Because we've talked about the dwellings and that's one aspect, but there are some other changes that are proposed in the amendment.
Okay.
So the existing easement does not permit agriculture or commercial forestry. And except for, I think, isolated timbering for forest health management purposes. There is a 100-foot riparian buffer around the pond, or at least that portion of the pond that is in the existing easement. And there is a essentially a forest protection area defined by the 100-year floodplain of Ivy Creek and 600 feet from that floodplain. So that's the blue hatching and the west. And the amendment proposal would keep those same terms. It would extend the 100-foot buffer all the way around the pond. The prohibition on agriculture and forestry would stay, except for on parcel 37A, where the general, the regular terms for commercial agriculture would be included. So essentially there would be an exception. You could think of it as commercial agriculture is prohibited except for on parcel 37A, which is predominantly floodplain pasture, has Ivy Creek running through it.
And
I'm
would
sorry to
that,
interrupt. Is everybody seeing the map? Or is...
yes,
So there's a stream buffer on Ivy Creek, yeah?
That's right. So the terms that would be changing, we've talked about the dwellings. There'll be commercial agriculture permitted on 37A. The 3 parcels where commercial agriculture is not permitted would permit small-scale livestock grazing for the purposes of invasive species management, and that could only happen with holder-approved land management plan. That's a specific request from the landowner. I believe they want kind of a small herd of goats or sheep to help with invasive species control. So that would be permitted with a land management plan approved by this body. The buffers, the buffer around the pond would stay the same. There would be a 35-foot buffer on Ivy Creek. That's the stretch of stream going through 37A. And staff also wanted to take this opportunity to change the definition of that large forest protection area, because defining something by a 100-year floodplain that can change is going to change in the future. It's very difficult. It's going to become impossible for us to know on the ground, are we in the protection area or not? So staff is proposing to change that definition to instead be the 520-foot contour. Everything below 520 foot. You can see how that compares here. Here's a map of all the buffers as proposed. The gray is the existing buffer, 600 feet from the floodplain, and the green-yellow hatching is the 520-foot contour. So there's some area that is currently in the protection area that would be coming out. There's some land that is not in the protection area that would be going in. Overall, it's a small net gain for protection. There's more land being protected with this definition than the old definition.
What was the rationale for excluding agricultural use on 37A at the last discussion?
Agricultural use would not be excluded from 37A, and I don't believe it was discussed in October.
But you're suggesting that it should be permitted by action today.
Yes, and that was true in October too.
I mean, I would wish we would have as few specific, today and these particular landowner-oriented provisions, such as a small herd of goats only for the purpose of invasive species. Suppose somebody else has 3 goats that are just their friends. I would urge us
Their
not
friends
to
can
limit
stay out of the
agriculture,
buffer.
full stop,
what we were trying to do was not create a situation in which we were significantly reducing what was originally proposed and recorded. And we wanted to find a more practical way of measuring where these buffers are. So we
Yeah,
didn't want
no,
to
I think
propose
that's all
a
great. That's fine.
major
That's perfect.
shift.
James,
For fear of the appearance.
I'm sorry, James, does the original easement mention non-dwelling unit buildings now or in the future? Any limitations?
No, only, I can double check this, but it's all standard terms on kind of agricultural structures. There's nothing unusual.
Well, it would seem that there is a rationale to accept both 37A and C3.
All right. Are there any outstanding concerns or reservations that are lingering with anyone?
I would say looking at the map of your buffer around the pond, you really, I entreat you, please, not to buffer the dam of a pond on the downhill side.
Yeah, we generally try to write in an exception that allows disturbance and maintenance for dam maintenance whenever there's a
Just
buffer
cut
around a
the
pond.
thing off at the dam. I mean, really and truly. It's just a time bomb for a problem, and hopefully we'll all be off the problem, off the board before we have to listen to it, but it's a problem that will happen in the future when, the pond needs to be cleaned out.
Yep.
I have to admit, I'm a bit bemused by the fact that there's a 100-foot buffer around the pond and only 35 feet along Ivy Creek. I don't understand the rationale
I
there.
know.
You caught that too. I mean, I was wondering what's
Yeah, we
special
all
about
saw
that
that.
pond. Yeah.
Well, the
I thought
35
that
foot
was
buffer,
for the agriculture that was gonna be on 37A.
It is. That's the reason, because if there's a 100-foot buffer on 37A, then it's not useful for agriculture at all.
That makes sense. So it's not a very big strip down there anyway.
And it's the only flat place on the property for potential agricultural uses. And also, I did want to point out too, though this blue buffer around the pond, currently the buffer is only on the west side of the pond, not on the east side of the pond. So this, half of this is new.
Yeah, this takes it closer up to the dwelling on C3.
Right.
And what's the limitation on agricultural buildings under that don't yet exist under the new easement terms?
I just checked the current deed. The amendment proposal doesn't propose any changes. They're permitted up to 1,500 square feet.
Is there an aggregate number total limit?
no, that's per structure. 1,500 is toward the smaller end, usually on a more extensive property or a large, a property that is mostly grazed. It's more like 4,500 square feet. So
I'm just struck that there's a tremendous amount of square footage of structures in the buildable area already on this property.
Yeah, and I'd be concerned with having it dotted with more. Also.
And there are no building envelopes, so we don't know where anything's going.
And we're okay with no building envelopes? I mean,
There are building envelopes.
There are building envelopes.
oh, good, okay.
Okay.
Let me find them for you. That I believe, and Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that the current easement or the amended deed includes any kind of total limit on impervious.
Well, the 1% cap, overall cap. That's in.
Okay, I didn't see that in here, but
That's a little
It's
weak,
standard
Lee.
in the template.
this is an older template.
Yes.
So the structures that are on C1 and 37C, those don't exist yet?
One of the structures on 37C exists.
Farm management office, I believe.
The rest of them don't.
Yeah.
So this small rectangular structure here is an equipment shed that exists. This one is a farm office that they've submitted building plan application for. So that doesn't exist yet. And same for the dwelling, that doesn't exist yet either.
James, just for a point of clarification, the proposal speaks to identifying the existing 1,340 square foot. It calls it a dwelling, but is that really the guest cottage or the guest house?
Yes. Yeah, that proposal is from October.
And so will there'll be a restriction on that there can't be any permanent cooking facilities? Will it remain a guest house as opposed to becoming a dwelling?
You could add that to a motion. It would be consistent with our more recent template to do that. To have
Just
this
let
clause in
them,
there.
as soon as they put cooking facilities in, we're good. Then we have 2 dwellings and off we go.
The other way to handle it seems to me is just to increase the overall allowable square footage for the one existing dwelling. Combine those two numbers and make it 7,500 square feet of allowable
Why don't we
space.
not do that?
Is anybody else struck by the fact that I'm looking at all these potential structures and existing structures on not that much land, and I'm wondering what was it that the easement protected that wouldn't have been protected already because of other constraints? It doesn't look like an easement after all of this development to me.
There were multiple division rights given up in the original easement. I don't remember now exactly how many.
There's also an extensive forested buffer in Ivy Creek in the original easement that was significantly more extensive than any current regulations would put in place.
Yeah, I'd be more comfortable if I knew how many division rights we were actually giving up.
So the number of division rights given up on the original easement that have already been given up, I believe there were 3 division rights and they retained 1 for this dwelling that hasn't been built. So they gave up 2. Obviously those have already been given up. Looking at the deed, this is a slightly unusual easement in that agriculture and forestry isn't permitted. It struck me when I went out there as kind of intended for habitat protection, as Scott said, large buffer on Ivy Creek.
Except we are allowing agriculture now on 37C, right?
37A is a very different parcel that wasn't contemplated because they didn't own it at the time. It is on Ivy Creek, but it's also an open, largely flat grazing parcel. So it seemed impractical not to permit the use that parcel's already been in for some time.
Yeah, I
Grazing.
don't disagree with that.
The main focus of the original easement was protecting Ivy Creek, and that's where a lot of this things came from.
All right. Hearing a mixture of concerns, some positive, some, I don't know. Sounds like we're kind of all over the place on this. How can we distill this down? Any thoughts?
Somebody needs to make a motion one way or the other.
Correct. And I just realized I have a time constraint. I've got about 25 more minutes.
Well, you're keen on this, make the motion.
But having missed the original discussion, what has been so vexing about this easement?
I feel like we were pretty poised to take it, and then had some public comments by Mr. Lynch, the county assessor. I'm not sure if he was acting as the assessor or a resident, but it gave us pause, and I think it muddied the waters a little bit.
From my recollection of that, Sherry made a pretty good clarification that her concerns in not supporting the proposal the first time was more that there didn't appear to be any development potential on that eastern portion of 37 C3 to give up.
Yes,
Less
thank you for
about the
that.
assessor concerns.
Thank you for that clarification. I was not swayed in any way, nor did I think it was particularly appropriate for the county assessor to show up and say that he wished us not to take the easement on the C3 because it would reduce the amount of tax revenue that he would gain.
Right.
I think
And
the fact the parcel was totally built out and it was a 21-acre lot, we're sort of like, well, you know, really, is this important to gather up?
Well, quite apart from that, if we were to be receiving these 3 parcels as a new proposal, how would we act? And adding 2 to the existing easement would seem to be relatively straightforward.
correct.
I agree with that too. I was not, I don't think I was one of those 6 that voted on it.
And particularly
Right,
if we,
I was there in October, and I'm going to stick with the way I voted in October.
okay. Yeah, my reservation was that that there were 3 dwellings. There were going to be 3 dwellings, and was swayed by partially by the fact that there will only be 2. Just doing the simple math on the 100 acres, along with the conservation value.
so that the drift would then be not to accept this C3 today.
I'm still inclined to accept it, but you know, we could put a motion forward and pull forth and do a roll call vote and see where we end up.
And again, I get to the point of clarity. The original proposal, when I say the original, the one in October spoke to the 1,300 square foot dwelling. And if that would be permitted under this motion, or is that structure, or is that building going to be limited to a guest cottage or a guest house?
That's a key issue, because we would have to restrict it to not being a dwelling.
And one way to do that would be to, as part of the motion, if you were inclined to accept that eastern portion of 37C3, would be as part of the motion to say that it should be clarified to specify that the guest house could not become a dwelling and should not have facilities for cooking added to it.
I have no problem with it becoming a dwelling and counting in a small size and being done. I guess we do need to be really clear. We've got a guest house that doesn't count right now. Can somebody say that that's the 1,300 square foot limited house and we're going to build a 4,500 square foot house in addition? I'm a little fuzzy on what the second house can be if it doesn't have a 1,300 square foot limit. If it doesn't have a square foot limit, I think I'm a little iffy about this.
I understand it has a 6,000 square foot limit, the unbuilt dwelling.
The primary dwelling.
The existing dwelling is under 6,000 square foot now, and I think Scott can correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be permitted to be expanded up to 6,000 square foot, and then a separate 6,000 square foot dwelling could be built elsewhere.
Jeez, really?
Yeah, that's the one that.
So that there would be up to 6,000 square foot dwellings. The 1,340 square foot guest house is not a dwelling, and it would not be allowed to have permanent cooking facilities such that it would become a dwelling. So only 2 dwellings would be permitted.
That would be a non-starter.
Yeah, go back, Scott, to the map that shows the potential location of all the permitted dwellings or structures. Yeah, that one.
Okay, so you've got, I'm not sure if I can make my pointer show up since we're looking at James's screen. On 37C, the structures to the left there. Well, let me start all the way at the west. 37A, no structures will be permitted. At least no dwellings will be permitted. 37C is just showing the shed and the farm office.
Right.
Next to the east is 37C1 is showing a dwelling that doesn't currently exist. So that's one dwelling there. And then on 37C3, there's the main house within that red oval, and then the guest house, which at least according to zoning is not counting as a full dwelling. And then down to the southwest of the pond, there's what appears to be another dwelling, may have been in the past, but that's the dance studio that's
Okay.
used by the owner. So we got here's two full dwellings, one existing and one new. And then next to the existing dwelling, there's a guest house, whatever exactly that means, which is currently furnished for sleeping and bathing, but not for cooking. And James, I can't recall that 21-acre portion of C3. I believe that only has development potential for one dwelling. Is that correct, or am I remembering that wrong?
That's right.
That's it. Yeah.
So by zoning, you can't put a stove in it anyway.
Right.
Under current zoning, yeah.
Yeah, under current zoning, you cannot.
Scott, what you're saying then is that under the proposed terms, you could end up on C3 with 3 6,000 square foot dwellings.
No,
There's
No.
two.
There's the existing dwelling on the eastern side of C3.
Then
And
one
then there's
additional
the
6,000.
One additional.
And what extension of the guest house?
Up to 1,500 square feet in the same location.
And the additional dwelling would be on C1 in that red circle to the west, not.
Well, this is very important. I mean, are you talking about this second 6,000 square foot residence being on C1 or C3?
That's the question.
So it exists on C3 and a proposed one would go in on C1.
Which is currently permitted under the recorded easement.
And are these actual building envelopes, or are these just circles for our edification?
Well, they're supposed to eventually become the building envelopes.
Yes.
But right now, they're just circles that we put on the map.
And you're not trying to do this by the end of the year?
We are.
So
Well-
the full build out here is basically two on the whole business here. 37C, C1, C3, 37As we're not worrying about. It is as shown in this picture is that you could have a 6,000 foot residence on C1. You have one already on C3.
Right.
And are you saying there's still room for another 6,000 square foot residence?
No.
I don't think so.
No, so the guest house turning into a residence, I don't understand. That's 1,500, but is that then becomes a residence and you have two residences on residents on C3 and one on C1. That's the full build out.
But it cannot become a dwelling.
Right.
It has to remain a guest house.
Okay.
Because
So-
if it did, the C1 house wouldn't be allowed.
So are we against having the build out, one house on C1, 6,000 square foot, one 6,000 square foot residence, which already exists on C3, plus a guest house?
Right. That's not a dwelling.
That's not a dwelling. I mean,
James, what's the total acreage again?
I think 99 acres.
So close to 1 unit per 50 acres.
yeah.
One last question following David's. What is then allowed on C3? What additional would be allowed on C3?
Accessory structures.
Accessory.
With no further building.
No dwellings, no, and not even by zoning. That's kind of the crux right now, is that there's really no development potential for C3. And so the question is it worth putting under easement? What's its value to put under easement?
So I would
My
just say, also under current zoning, that's true. But also the siting of the house that's there now is in a really lovely low spot. There's nothing to prevent future owners from building, you know, at a much more visible spot on top of the hill. There.
Well, I think we have to separate the specifics from the general. The general here is that eliminating building rights is not the sole criterion for accepting an easement, nor even the major one necessarily, if there are other natural elements to be protected. The second is what's allowed on the property. And the specific here is you're saying that there would be no further building of a dwelling on C3.
Correct.
That could change, however, if the property is not under an easement, if the zoning were to change.
The location of the location of the dwelling could move if it's not encapsulated in an envelope.
There's also a restriction on location of accessory non-residential structures. They have to be built within 300 feet of the dwelling, of the dwelling that they're accessory to.
Well,
And that doesn't affect this dance studio and those sort of on their own dwellings that are out there.
Well, the dance studio would specifically be permitted along with the stupa. And then, of course, farm buildings are permitted.
That dance studio is for private use, not commercial?
Yes.
And the standard terms for no commercial use
Are
be
included in the existing deed, yeah.
I believe there's an existing easement that allows use of the Buddhist temple by practitioners.
Yeah, there's an organization that has a right to use and maintain that temple. That predates the conservation easement.
Right.
Is there any restriction on the enlargement of that?
Good question.
I'm going to answer.
Is permitted. Dang it. Buddhist temple which currently exists and repairs and replacements thereof pursuant to the existing agreement recorded at the courthouse. So there's not a specific size limit in our deed. I would have to dig up that other one to see if there's one in there, which I can do. And I can't because the site's down.
I believe the size of the parcel on which that temple can be built is fairly close to the size of the temple itself.
Well, while they're looking this up, the only other way this could play out is that zoning would allow them to abandon a house, a 6,000 square foot house on C1, and turn the guest house into a residence or a house, a dwelling.
Well,
I mean, I don't understand. To me, this is pretty limiting if you build out as shown here. And if right now you can't, by zoning, change what's on C3 in terms of residence and guest house, then putting it in an easement sort of freezes that.
It doesn't reduce the development potential compared to current zoning.
No, but it freezes it from any zoning activity in the future that says, okay, we're going to allow the 2 residences on there, and we'll let the guest house become a residence.
And location of structures too.
Well, I would repeat the rationale for accepting C3, C1, and 37C to make that one set of contiguous easements. The conservation value of the 3 taken together is considerable. And with regard to C3, the extending of the buffer around the pond and the restrictions on the dwellings would seem to add to that with the possibility of future change in zoning were it not under easement. So I would urge that we take this as proposed.
Can we distill a motion out of that?
I would propose that we accept 37C and C3 added to the existing easement on C1 with the restrictions as they've been proposed.
I believe, I think you may have meant 37A. 37C is already under the existing
I did
deed,
mean
so
37A, yes.
I would like to add, provided that the red circles become building envelopes, or a fair approximation of the building circles become building envelopes. That there be building envelopes in approximately those locations and sizes.
I would certainly add that.
Can we take by your willingness to add that you second the motion as well?
Absolutely not.
Are we addressing the guest house, the guest cottage?
I'm
could
assuming,
possibly add to the motion that structure be prohibited from adding facilities for cooking.
yeah, just to clarify it, absolutely.
And just to clarify, half of 37C3 is under the original easement.
That's correct.
A little less than half, but the western portion.
Yeah, to the left of the pond.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we have a second to Dr. Moses's motion?
I'll second it.
All right. Further discussion?
I would further add that, as I understand it, and as Sherry's trying to get into the record here, is that the circle on C3 that encircles the current location of the dwelling and the guest house is an approximation of the site, so that ridge or that high ground to the further to the northwest, you couldn't move the house up there. You couldn't tear one down and put one up there, where zoning may go along with that.
Yeah, I agree, because
So that's another thing that you're protecting by having the easement.
exactly.
And the interpretation of that circle as being the approximate building site.
All right. Are there any more points of discussion that we'd like to bring up before we put this to a vote? Scott, I suggest that we do a roll call vote on this.
Yeah, that's good. So what I have down, just make sure I have this right, is Dr. Moses' motion was to accept the proposal with the addition of the approximate proposed building envelopes and the addition of restriction prohibiting cooking facilities in the guest house. Does that cover it?
And we take it
Is
as a given
is
that
the-
we're getting a buffer on Ivy Creek.
Well, that's the proposal, so that was
Yeah.
included in the proposal.
Okay, I just didn't want that to somehow fall
No,
out of this whole deal. It's about the main thing we're getting here.
We're getting the 35-foot buffer on Ivy Creek. We're getting, I would argue, a somewhat improved buffer on the kind of middle parcels there, easier to monitor and enforce, and also it gives us a section of that eastern stream there that we wouldn't have had before. So the yellow hatched is now the buffer. So to my mind, this is an improved forest protection area.
And
that's by accepting the 570 contour. That's how
It
you
was
got that?
520, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but it was definitely going by the contour instead of the distance from the edge of the floodplain, which was a bad idea on my part several years ago.
And the new unbuilt 6,000 square foot dwelling is to be located in that envelope on C1?
That's what I understood from specifying those two envelopes as part of the motion.
Okay.
Or they could put a kitchen in the guest house and be finished.
Yeah.
It's an option that appeals to me.
Yeah, me too.
Not so much the zoning, Sherry, sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah,
All
you
right,
could do that.
Scott, if you could go down the list, please.
Okay, hold on
I
just a
can
second.
call it if you want, Scott.
Either one.
If you wouldn't mind, that'd be great.
All right, Director Fennell.
Yay.
I don't know, is Pete here? Director Taylor?
No.
No.
No,
Director Buttrick? Director Moses?
Aye.
Director Emmett?
Aye.
Let's see, Director Moore
Aye.
and Director Merrick.
Nay.
One,
Okay, so
two,
that's-
three, four. It's 5-1, so the motion passes.
All right. All right, moving on. Is there any other old business? Doesn't sound like it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for making this special meeting. To getting things in under the wire for the year. Hopefully we are accommodating our grantors, that these folks that are making these donations are
Yeah, good luck to you all getting those envelopes done. We forgot under new business to wish everybody Merry Christmas, so I'll do that now, out of order.
out of order. Absolutely. Everyone have a happy holiday.
So
Be
Jay,
safe.
are you gonna be here? Actually, are you gonna be here on December 30th? I can't recall if the circuit court clerk's office is gonna be closed on the 31st. It might be.
I have no plans to be anywhere, and if I am
All
out of
right,
the country, that means I've done something terrible. So
Well, you and I are gonna be
Most
hanging out on the
clerks'
30th.
Most clerks' offices seem to be closed on the 30th, Rich, I mean, the 31st, Richie, FYI.
Yeah, no, that's what I thought. I think I think they're getting generous holidays, so we need to be done by the 30th.
All right. Well,
Okay.
this meeting, the 2024 year has come to a conclusion. We are adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
thank you all
Thank
very
you all
much.
for your work and time.
Yep.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you all.